Territories with Brisco and Bradshaw. I would be Bradshaw. That would be your Chickasaw native, your Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. And if you want to talk hot territories, I grew up in Texas and I watched every bit of it, loved every bit of it. Every person there was an icon. Every person there was rock star status. And this is one of them who was those figures that was instrumental in all of it, also in front of the camera and also behind the camera. Mr. David Manning. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, I appreciate it. Been looking forward to it ever since you guys called me.
Well, Dave, John and I, we've talked about having you on so many times, and we've seen you do a lot of these shows, and we've seen you do a lot of these national shows, and we're really thrilled and honored that you could come on our show here. But I got to compliment you again. The scenery there and your backdrop is beautiful. I didn't know Texas had trees like that, but you must have that one little spot in Texas that they have a lot of trees. So, but welcome to our show, Dave. John will get mad at me if I say any more thing else bad about Texas. But John was right, man. What a territory, and we can call them territories nowadays. But what a territory that at world class was. Even before it was world class, when Fritz was just Fritz down in Dallas territory. The talent that went through there is Hall of Fame, and you were smack dab in the middle of everything that happened there, the peaks, the valleys, and everything. But there's a time when we all get sparked by this great business that we're in here. What was the tipping point that you finally said, man, that looks like a great business, and I want to be involved in it? How did Dave Manning get involved in professional wrestling?
Yeah, I always tell people everything happens for a reason. And I wrestled, in high school. And back then, Texas, we weren't even accepted by the UIL at that point. So there was no rule. So when I was an 8th grader, I had gone to Oklahoma and Kansas to get really all my competition.
Of course, Oklahoma.
And I'm sure you won every match.
So I challenged the high school varsity guy as an 8th grader to go and represent the high school in wrestling. And I won state as an 8th grader, which can never be done again now because they now only allow 4 years. So I was a 5-time state finalist.
Wow.
And so I started coaching. At that time, Texas really didn't have, any coaches to speak of. And so I was coaching over at the YMCA on the side. I was also helping up at the high school. And we had a tournament out in Lake Dallas. And so one of my team was way ahead. We were winning the tournament. One of my boys was wrestling this kid. And I'm watching the kid. He has a pretty good potential. And but he was doing some things wrong. So when the match was over, I walked over, shook his hand. I said, hey, let me show you something. You're throwing your switch on top of the back. You got to get in and under the leg, get some leverage. And I showed him that. Then I showed him on his takedown. He was sticking his head on the outside. I said, you got to get it on the inside, or they're going to cross, cross arm you. And so I didn't think anything about it. Well, later on, I went to the concession stand and I went to order, and she said, aren't you David Manning? I said, yeah. She said, it's free. And I said, what do you mean it's free? So I said, all the coaches get free. She said, no, you get free compliments of Fritz von Erich. Well, I was a big wrestling fan back then. So I was like, Fritz von Erich's here? She said, well, he was. He's one of the sponsors. He left. So about 3-4 weeks go by. One of the wrestling coaches calls me and says, hey, Jack Atkinson's trying to reach you. And I said, who's Jack Atkinson? He said, that's Fritz von Erich. So he said, can I give him your number? And I said, sure. And so he called and got that big old deep voice. And he said, I want you to come out to my house. He said, I live on Fritz Lane.
Of course he does.
Dallas. And so
you turned it Iron Claw Boulevard.
Yeah. I went out.
Is that true? It's an Iron Claw Boulevard?
No.
Okay.
No, but he had Fritz Lane, right?
Yeah,
it's Fritz Lane. So when I got out there, you know how intimidating Fritz was.
Right. Yeah.
So he had me come back and sit down, and I think he had like 2 cigarettes going, and he said, I've been doing some due diligence on you. He said, you're pretty good damn wrestler. And I said, well, I appreciate it. He said, you remember that boy you helped here in Lake Dallas? I said, no. He says, Kerry. And in walks Kerry, probably didn't weigh 175 pounds. And he said, well, that's him. I want you to be his private coach.
Wow.
And he said, I got mats, I got whatever you need. You tell me what you need, I'll get it. I want you to coach him. I want you to work with Dave a little bit. Kev's already was a freshman at North Texas. And he said, and then when Mike gets on up, I want you to coach him. So I started doing that. We were about 3 months in. I had a beard back then. We were about 3 months in, and Fritz came in one week and he said, you want to make some extra money? He said, I'll let you be a second at the matches. I said, okay. So I went down and, you know, I just carried the robes back and forth. And
Dave, were you a fan? Were you a big fan or?
Big fan. And so I carried the robes back and forth. And back then all the referees were old retired wrestlers.
Right.
And so Fritz came in. I'd been there about 3 months. He said, I got an idea. He said, you cut that beard. We're gonna promote you as the youngest referee in wrestling history. So I cut my beard and I started out and I'll never forget, Lord Alfred Hayes was here at the time. And I came out of the ring after I did my first preliminary match. And Hayes pulled me off to the side and he said, you're young, you're an athlete. He said, you need to be diving in there to do that stuff, diving over them to do it. And, you know, when they're outside the ring, he was like, you got to really 1, 2, he said, you're just as much of the show as they are. And so, man, the fans, God, before you know it, they had my picture up for sale. And within a few months, I was doing the main events.
Wow.
And Fritz had me over there helping sell tickets. I quit my regular job. And I was over there helping sell tickets, helping Ed Watt. And one day Fritz came in and he said, come on up to the booking meeting, kid. And we go upstairs. I'll never forget. It was, so you had Bronco, you had Gary Hart, and you had Bulldog Danny Pletches. And then there was a chair over here. So I just sat down over here. Fritz was going through this stuff and he went through an angle, a finish. And he said, what do you think? Bronco said, I like it. Gary said, I like it. Pledge said, I like it. And out of the blue, he looked at me and said, what do you think? I said, I don't like it. He said, well, first of all, you're effing fired. Now tell me why you don't like it. I said, well, blah, blah, blah. I don't even remember, He thought, had a cigarette going. He said, kid's right. Changed some stuff up. Asked everybody again. We liked it. When we went to leave, he said, you stay here. They all left. He said, I could have said I was going to go out there and take a big shit in the ring. They'd all said they liked it. He said, I want you at every booking meeting from here on. 6 months later, I was his right-hand guy.
Wow.
What year was that?
That would have been 79.
Wow. Now the name had not been changed at that point yet, had it?
No. We when I first went there, we were
Big time?
Fort Worth was Big Time Wrestling.
Yeah.
And Southwest Championship Wrestling. And then we didn't change the name till after Channel 39 came in.
Right. Did you get much heat from Bronco and Bulldog Pletches? I mean, was there any did you feel any tension? I mean, here's this young kid and they were such a big stars in the business. They've been in the business forever. And now you're the one that's being risen to the main event.
Well, Pletch was right at the age of retirement. I mean, I don't think Pletch really liked refereeing anyway. And Pletch, you know his history. He traveled with Lou Thez. And if Lou would take on all comers. And if they ever thought they had a ringer, they would put Pletch in the ring with him the night before, and Pletch would beat the hell out of him.
Dave, I always heard that story. I didn't know if it was true or not, but I knew Pletch was a badass because when my brother made his tour down there, he used to come back and tell me about Pletches and everything. But that's a true story. He was Lou's policeman, in other words, right?
Yep. And he'd walk up behind you and grab your triceps up here, and my God, he'd bring you to your knees, just going pinching. But Bronco's so laid back. I love Bronco.
Yeah.
And he was also, a lot of people didn't know, he had a little interest in the company.
Yeah.
And so Bronco, he wanted whatever was best for the business. And like I say, Pletch was retiring. Now, I worked the whole circuit, but I didn't work up in Houston. Paul Bosch, that was his territory, and he had Nick Kozak as a referee.
Right.
And he had just brought Nick in, so he really didn't need me. So I would stop my circuit in Corpus and either fly home or drive home from there. So, but yeah, no,
now, you can clear up the long-standing rumor, because Bronco always got credit for this, but what I understood, it was Pletches that would count if they did a bunch of false finishes, would count with his foot. That was Pletches, right? Not Bronco.
No, it was Pletch, and that's when Fritz took him out.
Because over the years, I don't mean, sorry to be interrupted. Over the years, you know, kind of the myth had moved over to Bronco, like, hey, Bronco was there taking the ring down and counting with his foot, but that was Pletches.
Yeah, and he only did it once.
That's all it takes to be a legend.
because Fritz saw it.
Really?
He said, we got to get him out of the ring. So, you know, and Fritz let him stay on. He stayed on until it was sad one day. We all got to work, and Pletch would always come in and leave around 1. And he came in, and he always had some great stories. And he didn't come in. And also his wife called and said, hey, is Pletch there? And we were like, no. And at that time, he had some dementia. He was actually almost to Waco. He didn't remember, you know.
Yeah. You know, Dave, I always heard that was Rib him doing that, because they had a couple of guys in there, and they knew that Pletch didn't like to get up and down, so they were doing all these false finishes on him. And they kept doing the false finishes. And okay, I'll show you. So they did false finish. He walked over 1, 2, and then they quit doing the false finishes.
That it could have been, but I know Pletch. He might have reached down and grabbed one of them by the side, but he wouldn't do it no more.
That's great. Bronco was such a cool guy. I got to work with Bronco some when I was in Dallas. When I started there, Bronco was he just walked around. That's a cool, kind of like Arnie Scollin. It is cool thing.
Exactly. That's a good comparison, like Arnie.
He could tell. I mean, he had stories. My favorite story Brock used to tell was him, and I can't remember one of the other guys. They had Andre in the back, and they were going somewhere. And you know how Andre was. He had his beer or his wine, and he just sat in the back. And so they decided to pull through a drive-through, and they pull through. And while they're waiting in line at the drive-through, a little Fiat came and kind of bumped them in the back. And so they went to get out, and Andre said, let me take care of it. So Andre got out, and this guy's drunk and belligerent and looking at his car. And so Andre walked back there, and the guy looked up and Andre, Bronx said he took the Fiat and turned it on its side. And the guy ran off. After he ran off, Andre put it back down. They said they got their burgers and just pulled over in the parking lot there where they could eat them. Said for about 10 minutes, here come the police coming in and the lights going and everything. And the guy got out, his car's back down now. And he's pointing to his car, and then he's pointing like this and raising his hand and talking like this. And the cops are standing there going like this. They put his arm behind his back and arrest him, put him in the car.
That's great. So, how was business there? Because the business kind of got hot. I was watching some interview you did with Rick and Conrad. Business kind of got hot with Kabuki and Bruiser, right? That was when it first started getting hot, before the Freebirds and the Von Erichs ignited. How was business when you got there in 79?
79, 80. It started picking up in 80. We started doing we brought in some guys who were doing a little bit different camera work. And we had back then, when I first got in, Ox Baker was here, and we had Tony Charles and Les and Killer Carl Cox, and so we had good talent here, and so we were drawing pretty good. But then when we decided to go with Kabuki, and I don't know if you guys have ever met Mira, but he's only about 5'7". Yeah. And so we had this big story built about Kabuki and all of this. And so Gary Hart went to pick him up at the airport. I'll never forget, we were all sitting in the office, Fritz sitting there, I'm sitting there, Bronk. And Gary comes in and said, this is Mira Kabuki. And we're all looking at this little short guy going, oh no. And then when he had his first match and he jumped up and did that kick, and then when he blew the spray, man, the kids were scared to death of him, and he could do the nunchucks. I mean, what a piece of talent. And boy, from there, and the boys, Kevin was just at the point, you know, he was hitting the main events. Dave, Kerry had just come in, and that's really what started setting us on fire was the boys. And then when we brought in the talent to work against them, starting with Kabuki, and
were these Gary's guys? I mean, was Gary primarily in charge of bringing talent in at that time? Because the guys that you named off, that seemed like a Gary's cruise that he kind of went around the country with.
Yeah, Gary was with Fritz, you know, 3 or 4 times, and that was the last time he was there. I give Gary credit for everything I probably learned in the first 2 years of the business, because he was the booker, and he let me sit in on all the meetings with him and the boys, and you know, and I started helping with finishes, and that's really where.
How did you get smartened up? Just through trial and error? I mean, they didn't set you down and tell you the ins and outs of the business, right? Or they just kind of let you experiment your way in?
Well, I tell you, they were, even when I was right before I started refereeing, and obviously then they had to smart me up some, but when I was the ring guy, I would just go in and no one ever said anything. I would lay the robes down. I'd see the boys talking. And then Fritz was there one night. He was on the card, and I went to go in the dressing room, and Fritz cut me off. And he started speaking to me kayfabe, you know, and he's speaking Carney to me. And I had played around with Carney, with Kevin and Kerry, but I wasn't really good at it. He said, "What did I just say?" And I said, he said, "Get your ass out of the dressing room." And you know, because I'm telling you, if he found out the boys were together at a restaurant or anything, he'd come unglued. And so
it was really old school, like that kayfabe and all that stuff,
yeah.
right?
So one, I learned Carney really good in case I had to run into Fritz again. and then 2, I just always had a knack for finishes. I mean, it was crazy, you know, and even when Ken was here, Ken was good at recognizing what he liked, but he wasn't good at finishes. And so I did all the finishes at that point. And then, you know, later on, it's a story I really haven't told, but Ken and I kind of got into it one night at a big show, and Fritz wasn't there. And I said, "We're not doing that." And we ended up calling Fritz, and Fritz decided, I'll never forget, Ken was on the phone. Then he handed me the phone. He said, he wants to talk to you. He said, "Do you really not like it that bad, Dave?" I said, "No, it's bad." He said, "All right, put him back on the phone." I'll never forget. He slammed that phone down so hard it broke the head off of it. Wow. We were at Reunion Arena. And when I got to the office next morning, he said, "You know, Ken's going to turn his resignation in today." He said, "We all know it." He said, "You ready to step to the plate and take it on full time?" I said, "Yeah, let's do it."
Wow, that's quite a move. Come in unknown and no experience, and all of a sudden a major territory like that. But you had been, wow, this is intimidating though too. You know, with all these guys coming in.
It was, and you know, and like John said a while ago, with some of the boys, you know, they would come in and they, you know, I wasn't a former wrestler, I wasn't, but for the ones that knew me, Brian Adias, we just did a thing out there, you know, the Tales of the Territory, and he said 80% of everything that happened came out of my head, and Kevin said exactly right there. And so as the boys would get to know me, but I remember when Mulligan came in, Jack. Rick Hazard had started refereeing, and that's when I was full-time booker. And so Jack came in, and he wasn't being real solid. And so we were promoting him for a match with Kevin the next week. So he was going to be in the main event that night. So Fritz called and said, "Hey, you tell Jack to stiffen up tonight," to lay him in. And I said, "Okay." So I saw Rick walk by. I said, "Rick, come here. Go tell Jack to stiffen up a little bit tonight." So I'll never forget, I had 2 of the boys in front of me sitting at a desk, and I'm doing a finish. And all of a sudden, you know, Jack had to come in and duck to come under the door. And he looked at the 2 boys and said, "Was out." They left, and he come, and I'll never forget, he grabbed my desk and just shoved me right up against the wall, pinned me against the wall. And he said, "You want me to lay one in?" And I said, Jack, I'm just the messenger. Fritz said, if you don't lay him in tonight, it's you and him next week. And he said, well, don't ever say that to me again. I said, understood, but tonight, please stiffen up.
Now, were you out of the ring as a referee at the time you took over the book there?
No, I was still doing, I would do some of the main events. I wasn't doing any of the preliminary stuff. We had, we took one of the announcers, Ralph Pulley Jr., and turned him into a referee. And we had Rick Hazard, as I say, he was refereeing, and then I would help, you know, do some of the big angles and the stuff in the main events. Because I still wanted that TV exposure.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's got its benefits.
Right. Yeah, that sure does. From listening to a couple of your deals, you had quite a few benefits. I tried to count your ex-wife story today on one of the interviews you talked about. I think you and Ric Flair was kind of juggling the numbers at the same time.
Well, I told Rick when we did that podcast, I said, Rick, some of these we can't tell.
That's for sure there.
My son's going to start calculating and going, wait a minute. Where's your mom then?
Now, which one is my mom? Now, the progression with the guy, with the kids, with David, of course, was one of these kids were just dynamic athletes. And I got to ask this question, being an old wrestler myself, how were they on the mat? I mean, and school wrestler, were they pretty decent? Because they were athletes, but they didn't have that wrestler body to begin with because they were long and lanky, right?
Yeah, well, Dave, a lot of people thought Dave was more skinny, but you got to remember, Dave was pushing 6'8".
I know, he was a big kid.
So when you take a 6'8" guy, you can put the muscle on him, he's still going to look skinny.
Yeah, he's still tall.
And then Kevin was probably, my God, the most natural athlete I've ever met in my life. I mean, his thighs were so big when I met him, and could jump out of the building. And then when Kerry come along, you know, and we all know roids were heavy back then, but you also have to remember they were legal. I always say athletes just say, yeah, I did them when they were legal. But the boys came in, the biggest complaint we got, they were stiff. I mean, real stiff.
Well, they didn't work with the old man then. If they called little boys.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody used to tell me, you know, if you work with Fritz, you had 18 straps across your chest from that boot of his whenever it was. But the boys, Kevin, Kerry, and Dave could work. Dave became probably the best worker.
Dave was, I had the privilege of working with Dave a lot. Yeah, you're right. He was a great worker.
He could work hill too.
Yeah.
You know, Dave could work hill. When he went to Florida, matter of fact, they used him as a
that's what I'm talking about down here. He worked in hill here. Him and I worked a little program down there one time.
Yeah, it's sad because I think Dave could have carried the belt for a little while.
I do too.
Because he, like you say, he could have got the heat when he needed to get the heat on. As you know, you're not going to draw super big if the hometown guy's a heel.
Him and my brother Jack had a match in Miami, I believe it was. It was like a 45-minute through Broadway match. And it was one of the best matches Jack talked about forever. I mean, it was one of his favorite matches he ever had, I think. David was right there every step of the way, and Jack was a pretty fair athlete too. And so they just tore the house down. But I remember Dave could go either way as a baby face or you know, when he first came in, you know, the little girls were just going crazy about it because you know, a handsome young man too. But they just had that natural instinct about Ben Von Erich again, or Atkinson, right?
Yep, had the natural instinct, and then if there was a problem sometime, and this is probably what separated Dave. He was a good listener in the ring. So, as you know, a lot of guys can't call a match. And a great example is if you're in the ring with Flair, you shut your mouth. Mm-hmm. You know, he's going to make you shine. He's going to make you, same thing with Harley. You know, shut your mouth. Have some respect. Just listen. And if there was ever a knock, that could have been one of the knocks that some of the boys would be like, no, let's do it this way, you know. And you need a good, if you got a good heel, let him call it.
One thing they had though, David, it's hard to explain to people because I got the tag with Kerry later after the heyday of Texas and with Kevin and against them both. both sides. They had a charisma that was just innate. I mean, that Kerry Von Erich was like Elvis in Texas. It's hard to explain to people how over he was. He would walk through the airport and people would just flock to him, and he would introduce himself. He goes, "Hi, I'm Kerry Von Erich." You know, real humble, and it was just people would just melt. It was unbelievable the chemistry that they had to be stars.
Well, you know, I tell people sometimes, you know, I think what probably helped the boys more than anything was, you know, obviously Fritz was a big time heel, but this was his territory. So he worked both ways a lot of time. There was some, like when he worked against Duke Kilmuga, they wanted him to kill Duke, you know? And so the boys, every time one of them would get an accolade in track or basketball, when Dave got his scholarship, growing up, as they would achieve goals, Fritz always had them on the tube over there in Fort Worth that, oh man, I got to congratulate Kerry. I got to congratulate Dave. I got to congratulate Kev. You know, Kev set the all-time record as a freshman for lifting weights and stuff at North Texas. And so I think being in that living room, you guys know wrestling's different than any other sport. Football, they got a helmet on 90% of the time. Wrestling, they get to know you. I mean, they see you and so they saw the boys grow up, and I honestly believe like a lot of the, I'm going to say good old wrestling fans we had, they felt like that was their boys. They had
that's a great point. John and I were actually talking about that before the show. The relationship the fans had with the Von Erichs was unlike just about any relationship, because I guess they you just perfectly described, they saw these kids grow up. So it wasn't like a fan on fan. It was like a family member making these accomplishments. So each step of the way, the fans got to enjoy their progress, right?
Exactly. And John hit it right on the head. People will never know how over they were. I'll talk about Israel in a second, but here I'll give you a great example. When we got on 39, I mean, a lot of people thought that was going to be a bust. That's a Christian network, network, you know, all over the country. And here they put wrestling on Sunday mornings. We were on at 10 o'clock Sunday morning, and it got such big ratings. They replayed it at 6. And so when the Easter Sales Telethon came along, Channel 39 was doing it that year. Well, that's a 24-hour, you know, they don't show anything. They just cut straight to Easter sales, and they have different celebrities come on. Well, they wanted to preempt everything but wrestling. So they called down Sportatorium and said, we need somebody to come over and we'll do a match, and then they'll throw it back to the studio, and then we'll throw it back to them, and they can introduce the next match. Well, Fritz sent me. And so I went over there, and so we're doing this, and they had all three of the boys. They had Kevin, David, and Kerry coming in that afternoon to make an appearance on Easter Seals. And so they brought them into the phone banks. Well, I'm not kidding you. A lot of the people at Easter Seals, their noses went like this, like, oh my God, we're going to have professional wrestlers here. And the boys came in, and so I'm doing my thing, throwing the matches and this and that. And they came up and said, hey, I think we're going to say anybody that donates $50 gets to talk to one of the boys. I said, oh, I don't know. I think you're going to get flooded. I don't think, you know, no, we're going to do it. Well, back then, there was only one phone system, Southwestern Bell. And so they made that announcement. And in 5 minutes, the whole phone system went down. I'm not kidding you. It went down. It was a blackout. And so they're trying to find out what's going on. And Southwestern Bell is saying you got too many calls coming in. And so they finally get it back up, and one said, hey, we're just going to have the boys. We got so many coming in, leave your name and number and this and that, you know. And so then they wanted us on every year. And I left that day and went home after wrestling was over, and I get a call that afternoon. Hey, we want you to come back and work the phone bank. Because the guy they had been doing it for years and years and years is actually Mr. Peppermint. And, but he was a tearjerker guy. I was more like, come on, you know, and so I went back, and I'd say that's probably one of the biggest blessings that happened to me. The following year, they had me as one of the co-hosts. and they would move from station to station. Maybe this year they're on channel 39. Next year they'd be on channel 5. Well, then they would use the anchor people from the news on 5, like Scott Murray for sports. And if it was channel 8, it was Dale Hansen and whoever. But they kept using me because I wasn't with any station. And so I hosted that thing for like 10 straight years as a co-host. And I got more stuff out of that. I mean, speaking engagements and stuff like that.
You know, I was telling Jerry before the show, I was talking to him about the Von Erichs. Somebody yesterday, I'm just random down here in East Texas right now, was talking about a star, some young guy. He goes, man, the guy's like a Von Erich. And this was just yesterday. You know, this is 40 years almost after the heyday of the Von Erichs. And that's still how revered they are in Texas.
Not just Texas. When we went to Israel, I didn't go on the first trip, but when they called, now a lot of people won't believe this, 40,000 people at the airport.
Wow.
How did
they
you
had
guys get
announced
so
when they were
popular in
landing.
Israel? Did you guys get TV there? Was that what it was?
You know what? They started syndicating our show without us even knowing it. Because back then, you know, we had the second biggest cable. Turner had the biggest. We had the second biggest. Channel 11 was called a superstation.
Right.
But we syndicated our tape into about 40 different states when we were hot. And Israel picked it up. And so when we went to Israel, I went on the second tour, and I tell people, at that point, Israel thought I was just a referee. I had to have bodyguards. The prime minister of Israel came and said, you can't make any more appearances. People aren't going to work. No, I'm dead serious. And when we drove from Haifa to Tel Aviv, they were just people lined up on the side of the highways to see us go by. And I'll never forget, Tom Landry went over there to Israel, and he told Fritz, he said, I went in a diamond store and the guy recognized me. And he said, oh my God, you're Tom Landry. And he said, yes. And he said, you must know the Von Erichs.
I always wondered that because that just seems so random that the country of Israel just became this hotbed for WCCW wrestling.
No, it was, we sold out the same matches, just mixing them around. Soccer fields every night. And soccer fields are big. Sold them out every night for 6 straight nights.
Wow, it's just unbelievable. And people, how strong the television was and how good the television was. You guys did so many innovative things. Who was that was bringing that around? Was that you? Was that Fritz? Was it a combination of all of Mantell? Because you guys end up miking the ring. You had several different cameras, not just the hard camera and the remote. I don't mean to.
Yeah, when Channel 39 came in and started filming, you got to remember in Fort Worth, when I first got started, we had one camera. It was stationary. Didn't even have a camera guy at it. It just shot the ring. And then they had another guy that held a camera, but he didn't come up by the ring. One was high and one was low. And so when Channel 39 came along, we started doing the stuff. And then at that point we had, and it was actually the boys, they decided, Kevin and Kerry said, hey, I want music to go to the ring. And so we started introducing, you know, different wrestlers would pick their songs, and we would, you know, Kerry was the modern day warrior. So Tom Sawyer and Kevin was Stranglehold. And so we started doing that. And then Channel 39 said, hey, they came in and we had a meeting. I would meet with Channel 39 with Harrison Gillum, one of the top directors there, producers. And then one of the number one guys was Keith Mitchell, who he continued to work. Matter of fact, Turner stole him, Crockett and them. And then he ended up with them, and he's been all over. He just retired down, I noticed, for Jarrett and them with one of the new companies. But so I went and met with them every Thursday, and we'd go over everything. And one week they said, hey, we want to put cameras and a mic in the ring. We want to put a mic in the ring, a boom mic on each side. Can we put camera guys up on the side of the ring? And I said, you can, but man, I can't guarantee he's not going to get knocked off of there. And they were like, well, we just think we can get more close-ups and do some instant replays. So Channel 39 had a lot to do with it. But then when we ran it by Fritz, he loved it. He said, hey, if we can make it work. And then it worked, obviously. I mean, you could hear the guy. We had to be really careful talking in the ring. Because
did I get any throwback from the guys? You know, hey, we can't work out there. We can't call our spots or anything like that.
No, because we just warned them it wasn't an option, and the guys working here just loved working. And I think a lot of them, I mean, the territory, we were selling out everywhere. Saturday night at a high school, we would sell out their stadium. And that was after we turned the birds, you know, and it was the Von Erich Freebird feud. But no, everybody just loved it. And so, and then we started shooting little vignettes. And that's where they really got to know the boys. Like we would go to a bar with the Freebirds, or we would take Jimmy Garvin, and he had Sunshine as valet. We'd shoot them in a spa, you know, and that really separated us. And, you know, a lot of people don't know there was a meeting. I always say I'm going to get heat every time I tell this story, but there was a meeting here in Dallas. I won't say who all was at it, but I'll say that it was basically in New York. Senior was still alive, and us, and they wanted to partner up and go everywhere. And Fritz was really high on what are we going to do with the territory guys running the territories. And well, you know, TV's TV. And at that point, we still had all the Von Erichs alive. Well, actually, no, that was after Dave. We had just done Texas Stadium, 42,000 people. And so Fritz was, you know, why do I need you guys? And we would have been 60%.
Wow.
And Fritz
that's another thing John and I were talking about earlier. If Fritz would have really given the green light, you guys were so competitive and had so much talent there. This was really right at the genesis of Vince accumulating all the talent from across the nation. But you guys already had the talent there, and you had it established there. If Fritz would have given a green light, there's no telling what we would be seeing nowadays. You know, really.
Well, that and the thing was, I mean, even our syndication, the New York guys were pulling about 11, and in their backyard we were pulling a 14, 15, and so we were. You know, you can say, why do we need you? But who knew 2 years later, we had two more dead Von Erichs.
Right.
And so it's all hindsight. Kevin was for it, I have to say. Matter of fact, Kevin and I both wanted Fritz to, the demand for Texas Stadium was so big, and we were getting calls from all over the world. How can I see it? How can I see it? We wanted Fritz to pay per view. That would have been the first one.
Wow.
And there's no telling what it would have done. Because it had the sentimental of the David Von Erich death, you know, all of the, everything that went with that, but then it also Kerry was going to win the belt, and it was crazy. I mean, that show, I have to say, matter of fact, somebody sent me a picture. It looks like a sea of people standing and cheering whenever the pin happened.
What was the pushback from Fritz on not wanting the pay-per-view?
He didn't understand it, what all it was gonna, you know, curtail, and we never even had the meeting. The guys at Channel 39 said they could make it happen. And it was probably going to cost us back then. You look at the numbers, it was going to run us about probably $25,000 to $40,000. But oh my God, there's no telling what the viewership would have been. And we could have probably, back then, we would have probably got $29, $39 a ticket for pay-per-view. And because at that time, that was the biggest indoor show that ever happened in the US.
Yeah. Was it Vince Senior that wanted to partner with you guys?
Well, there was two here. And whenever Vince Senior died, hey, hats off. We can all say what we want about Vince Jr., but he didn't have all that loyalty to all those guys out there. You know, hadn't built that kind of relationship with them. And I look at what he's done. I mean, hey, you can't argue when someone just sold their business for $9 billion and only sold half of it.
He bought it for $1 million and sold it for $9.3 billion. It's a pretty good
half
return.
of it. He's still 49%.
That's right. And he's the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
He's
a very brilliant guy. You know, whenever I heard they were going public, I was like, I had told Kevin, you can't do it because they're not going to know how to run the business. Vince was brilliant to say, we can go public, but it has to be understood by the board. I call all the shots in the wrestling. So they had the benefit of going public, but yet they had the business was still kind of privatized inside that.
And they had the benefit of going public twice because they went on the NASDAQ first and then they went to the NYSE.
Right.
So you got two huge public dates. It was
Yeah.
brilliant what he did.
Yeah. I thought whenever, you know, I look back and I always say, I didn't think it was a good idea for him to buy WCW because I like the idea of a little competition out there. And, but hey, like I say, who can argue with the shots that have been called, because arenas got filled up, business got big. I said we were almost like a farm team at that point, because if you look at the guys, you had King Kong Bundy goes to New York. You had Ravishing Rick Rude goes to New York. You had the Dingo Warrior goes to New York. And then Steve Austin was here. He goes to WCW, makes the loop, and then ends up in New York. So it was just like boom, boom, boom. You know, then Kerry ends up, after everything totally fell apart here. I was gone at that point. I left here in late '87, and Rick had been trying to get me to come over with Crockett forever. And so I went over and was handling their souvenirs and then doing some refereeing. And then I kind of just broke away on my own, was doing some international stuff in the islands, the Virgin Islands, stuff like that. Israel, I did a big show in Israel. And
let's go back. You were talking about Chris Adams earlier. Chris, of course, trains Stone Cold Steve Austin and Steve Williams at the time there. But when Steve started, how involved were you in overseeing that training, or was Chris completely independent of you guys on his training camps and all that?
Yeah, his training camp was it was off to the side. We had nothing to do with it. Now, what we did do was, you know, we got Steve started here. I actually used Steve. I think the first time he probably wrestled out of the Dallas-Fort Worth circuit, I used him over in the Virgin Islands.
Did you?
And
You remember when he approached, when he came in? I've heard the story from Steve where he was there at an event. One of his buddies said, "Hey, Steve," because they see the guys up live and everything. Steve was pretty good sized guy, of course. "Hey, Steve, you can do this stuff," and that's when he hooked up with Chris Adams there, I believe. Yeah, he went. He's the only one I really know from Chris's camp that, you know, obviously went on to be huge. They used to. It was funny. They used to. You know, we'd have guys all the time come to Sportatorium, want to wrestle, and so we always had a funny thing we would do. We would have them come to Sportatorium, and they'd put them in the ring with me. And, you know, a lot of people don't understand just hitting the ropes hurts. Yeah. If you do it right. It sure does. I'd make them hit the ropes and make them really I knew their ribs were getting sore. And then I'd get in the ring with them. And like I say, I could shoot a little bit. So I would, you know, and then Bronco would always come down with that cigars of his, and he would say, "You can't even beat the damn referee. You want to be in the business?" You know? So you guys weren't referring them over to Chris at that time. No.
You have a great story though.
We should have put a school in at that time.
Yeah.
You have a great story though about sneaking Chris out of Israel though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Chris had a bad temper, especially.
I was around Chris. I think I was around Chris, and he was wonderful to me. I mean, wonderful, a perfect gentleman. But I was never around him when he was drinking. So I got to put a caveat.
Be glad, because you might have been the one that got beat up.
That's right. I'd have been the one that been super kicked.
He got into it. He was over in the hill. We had the baby faces at one hotel, and we had the Hills at the other hotel. And I got the call that Chris had gotten a fight. By the time I got over there, they didn't tell me how bad it was. Chris had, it was over a phone call. He was trying to call home, and the guy wouldn't let him. And so Chris super kicked him, and somehow the way the kick hit him, it knocked his eye out. I mean, literally, it came out, and it was so damaged, it was gone, you know. And so we took Chris back to my hotel, and then the promoter there said, "You got to get him out of the country." For one, you know, over there, they kind of have, like, they call them tribes, the different, you know, villages. And so they were like, this one definitely believes in, no pun, but an eye for an eye. And so then we also knew the police were going to get involved. So I called Fritz and I said, "I'm going to get him out of the country." Well, they had taken our passports. So Fritz was like, "How you going to get him out of the country?" I said, "I don't know, but I'll get him out of the country." And so I told the promoter, and he said, well, I can't help you. He said, but maybe if you can somehow go down and get behind the desk tonight when no one's there, I think the passport will be there by the safe. And so, you know, hell, I'm in my 30s.
Now, is this your show or is it a WCW show?
This is WCCW. This was the second time we were there. So sure enough, I went down. We had already been there about 5 days. I went down, and sure enough, the passport was there. I had to sneak behind the counter and go in this little room, and there it was. And I came out, and then we went out. We had sweatshirts with hoods on them. We go out and we walk literally 2 blocks from the hotel to catch a cab. And we went to the airport, and both of us were afraid his passport had already been locked. And I remember I went in the airport and I watched him till he got through customs. Once he's got through customs, I knew he was gone. And then I went back, had him drop me off 2 blocks from the hotel, went back in the hotel, and now it's late. And I got to my room, and I think the plane took off at 11. By the time I got back to my hotel, it was like 12:30, 1. I hadn't been there, I'm not kidding you, 25 minutes. They were banging on my door. And so I'm like, back then, you know, I had a lot of hair and a mustache, and I'm messing my hair up, and I went to the door and I'm trying to look like I'm sleepy, and because they were saying police. And when I opened the door, they came in to the point, it kind of scared me. I was like, do they already know I helped him? Or so they immediately like, where's Chris? And they were looking all over my room. I said, I have no clue. And they were like, you know where Chris is? Where's Chris? And I'm like, I'm just played dumb. And and so sure enough, one of them got, they called him to the phone. He went over and got on the phone and slammed the phone down. He said he got on a plane. And they looked at me for a long time, then they just left. And I remember I was so glad 2 days later when I was able to get on a plane and get out of there.
But that was the best feeling you had the whole tour when you got on a plane.
Yep.
Gary, you almost had to sneak somebody out of a country, didn't you?
Yeah, big Leon White, a big Vader in Kuwait when he grabbed that photographer. Actually had, and a lot of people doubt this story, but it would, you know, Dave, you John, you guys travel the world. You know that our Secret Service and our military has unique ways of getting people out of the countries when they need to be. I had this colonel, full-bird colonel, come up to me the night it happened, and they told me, you want him out of the country? And I said, well, yeah, but you know, I what you talking about? He said, we could take Leon, and we got containers that we can they're set up for people like this, that we can put Leon in and fly him over to France, which are like a 2-hour flight, something like that, 2.5, 3-hour flight, and put him there, and then he can go where he wants to go. I said, well, I better check on it before I make a commitment like that. So of course I called Junior and Vance, and no way, he got to stay there and face the punishment, you know. So I didn't do it, but you know, I always visualize that scene, you know, putting Leon White in one of those big ass containers, because he didn't like it being alone anyway.
Well, I've always wondered, you know, I went back and did a tour on my own after I'd left the WCCW, and I was a little worried going back over there, but nothing happened. And then, but I told somebody not too long ago, I said, I've told this story so many times and I'm afraid they've heard it and know I was involved, and I may not to go back now.
Hey, it's not like you got the crazy enough business, but around, I guess it's around 82, 83, that's when the Birds came to Texas. Who was it that brought the Birds, and what do you think when you got Michael and that crazy bunch of guys in Texas?
Well, believe it or not, Gary set it up, Gary Hart. But between the time that there was about a 3-week span or a 4-week, by the time we made the plan and then got him here, you know, Fritz and Gary had a little blow up. And so Gary was gone, and Ken literally stepped in the week the Birds came. So you talking about right time, right place, because I'm not so sure a toddler couldn't have booked that. Me and Ken, we were just along for the ride. But we brought him in, you know, we brought him in babyface. Well, it's not.
Yeah, let me ask you, Did you bring him? I always wanted to ask you this. Did you bring him in babyface knowing you're going to turn him heel against the boys?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because you got to remember, there's only room for so many main eventers. Okay.
Right.
You can't have 6 big names as main eventers, you know?
Sure.
And so it was hard enough with us. It was a lot of times it was real hard to bring in a good baby face. Now Brody came in, but he was a different mold. But you know, you already know you're going to be second fiddle because you got the boys here. But you could come in as a heel, and if you could work and you got into that category of working with them, man, you got the good paydays. But it was the perfect thing when we brought the Birds in. And the good news is they got over so big baby face. But when they slammed the cage door on Kerry's head over there at Reunion, oh man, I thought we were going to have a riot. And from there, from that day forward, we were sold out everywhere we went. I mean, we'd put tickets on sale and we'd be sold out in 2 days.
That's one of the most mimicked finishes in history.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, the old cage door, not sure if he did it on purpose, not sure if he did, you know, and slammed in the head. It's just, you know, everybody, let's do the Freebird cage door.
Well, you know, and it was dangerous because when we all sat in the meeting, and we told this on Tales of the Territory, Kevin was there, about 80% of the finish was mine. And then we started talking about slamming the door on Kerry. And Fritz was like, he actually brought the building, Bill Hines, who was with him forever, ran all the buildings and the maintenance, brought him in. And he said, on the cage, doesn't the latch go down like this? And he said, yeah. And he said, how sturdy is that once it's there? He said, well, I've got it so tight, you can't push it open. And so Fritz said, what we'll do is you got to make sure, but let's have Kerry get his head in there. And he said, we'll open the gate. And he told Terry, put the latch down. That was the whole key, or it would have killed Kerry.
Yeah.
Because, and so my job was to make sure the latch was down. If not, I was going to take the blunt force of it with my shoulder into the cage part. And so when we got over there, the deal was down, but Terry slammed it so hard that you heard it all over that building when it hit, and Kerry just went shooting back. I thought it had hit him. And he's down, and I can see the color, but I don't know if it's from the cage door, because I'm yelling at them, and you know, and so by the time I get over there, I'm literally leaning in. I said, are you okay? Are you okay? And he goes, yeah, it got me a little bit. And I could tell he was dazed, but he had got the color. And oh my God, at that point, you know, Flair had got out. He won because he's the first one on the floor. And the rest, I mean, then it was just a matter of which Von Erich and which Bird it was going to sell out.
Yeah, the place just exploded at that point. One of the hottest territories. I don't know what you can compare it to. Maybe Tommy Rich in the Carolinas or King in Memphis, but the hottest territories in the world.
Well, not only that, you know, look at the backup we had. You had Chris Adams, okay, against Jimmy Garvin and Sunshine. You had Buddy Roberts would also go down and work with Iceman King Parsons. You know, we brought Ice in. Then you had Brody. And I mean, it was crazy the talent we had. I mean, from the time you got through with the first match, every match was almost like it would have been semifinal or main event anywhere else.
Yeah, and when you talk about the old vignettes, the vignette of Jimmy Garvin working on the ranch for David, that's to this day maybe the greatest wrestling vignette in history. Everybody knows that one. Yeah. It's just so well done, but it's something that's just not thought of. You know, you look at sports trying to make it. They don't do personality profiles. It's the dumbest thing in the world.
It'd be the best thing in the world. I mean, like the Texas Rangers here, they should be doing that on every player.
Right.
Get the people to know them. But you know, it's crazy because Sunshine, she was over just as big as, I mean, it was crazy. Matter of fact, in Israel, you remember the Farrah Fawcett poster that came out? That was the hottest poster in the country. You guys know
in the world,
in the history of the world,
kind of see through. But in Israel, they had a vote of who was the sexiest, best looking girl, whatever. Sunshine won.
So
you know.
I love Michael Hayes. He's a dear, dear friend. And I hope he lives to be 1,000 because this world needs Michael Hayes in it because he's entertaining. You fired a gun one time at a couple of Freebirds on the side of the road, didn't you? I love the Freebirds getting ribbed.
We had worked in Lawton, Oklahoma. And when we came back, we come down 287, you know. And it was late at night.
Many times.
It was late at night. And so I saw the Birds' car up ahead. So I backed off and I just kind of followed from a distance. And sure enough, all of a sudden I saw them pulling over. And I pulled over and I waited for them to go. I turned my lights off and they went. And when I saw them pulled over up here, I had backed off. I got my 9mm out, left my lights off. There was not a car in sight, you know. So I started going. And then I sped up just as I got close to them and stuck that 9mm. I turned and went bam, bam, bam. And they were all in the weeds taking a piss. They were diving and jumping. And so, unfortunately, they saw my car. And I saw them running to get in theirs. And so I'm going as fast as I can. And I'll never forget, there was a little store that was closed. And so I literally slammed on my brakes and almost going sideways and pulled in beside that building and turned my lights off. And then I saw them, they went by. And so when Monday night came, I went to the matches and Michael come up and he was like, you better not ever effing fall asleep when we're around.
And he meant it to.
And I didn't.
Michael got me with a couple really good ribs when I was there in Texas, and a few years later in Buffalo, I kick him in the back, and in a match. He's managing the Hardys, and I come in the back. Michael goes, "Could you kick me any harder?" Of course, he forgot the ribs. That was the receipt, and I said, "I kicked you so hard, a 20-year-old 8-ball popped up."
There's so many ribs, especially with the Freebirds there. And one of our dear friends, all of us, Brody Roberts, his hygiene wasn't always the best in the world. I think Jimmy Garvin told me the story. Was it you that put a dead raccoon or possum in his bag when he was working against Bill Watts, or how did that one go down?
No, it was so Bill was running the big show at the Superdome. And so Buddy flew in with Bill from somewhere else. And so Michael and Terry were driving up, and it's in August, about 120 degrees outside. And so on the way, they see a dead possum on the side of the road. So they pull over and they get the dead possum. They open Buddy's bag and they stick it in there and they close the bag. Well, they stopped and ate. They parked when they got there. And like I say, now you know how hot it gets in a car.
Right.
So when they take this out and they literally gave it to Buddy, he went in the dressing room. And like you said, Buddy, he didn't get it. No. Buddy goes in the dressing room and that night they had a 24 or 26 man battle royal. So the babyface dressing room is packed. And so Buddy goes into his case and just opens it up. And when he did, the stench of death just filled the room. Boys were throwing up. And so Buddy takes the possum, goes over to the trash can, dumps it, goes back, starts putting his shit on. And so Buddy and Terry wanted him to get close to him. So when they got to the ring, it was a 6-man tag team. So Buddy and Terry stood on this side of the corner, and they made Buddy stand over here. And they waited till Watts tagged in. They tagged Buddy in. And so Buddy went and tied up with Watts.
Oh.
And Watts just all of a sudden just took him and threw him out over the top rope and said, "What the fuck?"
Great.
You know what's bad about this? This is normal to us.
Yeah.
You know, it's one time David, I had some friends that up into wrestling. They were telling some old frat boy stories. Tell us a wrestling story. I started telling them one, and I realized nobody's believing me. Why would I make this up? This is not even a wild one.
But when we went to Israel,
especially in Texas, was crazy.
Buddy got drunk going to Israel. Back then, you had to go Dallas, New York, Paris, Paris to Israel. Buddy got so drunk on the plane, they cut him off. So now he gets mad. And so we just put him down, told him to go to sleep. By the time we got to Israel, he was still drunk. So Michael's trying to get him up, get him off the plane. And back then, you know, they were going to take us around customs. So they brought the, you know, the stairs up to the plane where you just walk off on the tarmac and get in the bus. So there's like 20 Jeeps around with gun turrets in the back. And, you know, here's all of these people everywhere. And the press is there. And so I said, come on, we got to get him off. So Michael's got Buddy and he drags him off. And as Buddy gets to that platform of the deal, he grabs hold of the rails. And he's just looking around like, all of a sudden he starts yelling, "You son of a bitches killed Jesus." And I'm like, oh my God, Buddy. And so Michael's like, shut up, Buddy. And so Buddy yells it again. And the promoter's like, it's okay, just get him down and get him.
It's okay.
Well, you know, you're talking about rib. We played a rib on Kerry. Kerry was pretty easy to pull a rib on, right? So Brian Blair's in the territory. And so we were wrestling in Tyler, Texas. We're coming back. Brian says, hey, y'all follow us. I'm going to tell Kerry to get in the trunk and that I'll pull over. And when I honk, I'll pop the trunk from the inside and he'll moon y'all. I said, okay. He said, but I'm going to drive to the truck stop and back up to the restaurant. Restaurant had a big picture window, you know. So we haul ass to the truck stop. Brian pulls in, backs up, starts honking, honk, 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 till everybody in the restaurant is looking out the window like, what's going on? And then he pops the trunk and there's Kerry's big old ass, you know, mooning the whole restaurant. And then Kerry realizes what happened. So he's trying to pull the trunk down and Brian's got his thumb on the button so it won't latch. It just keeps going down. And so here's Kerry bobbing up and down, you know, with his pants down.
You don't know where you got that from, do you, Jerry?
Yeah, it happened to Brian down in Yeehaw Junction, Florida.
Yeah, that was a rib that these guys pulled on Brian originally.
Pat Patterson had been, it was back in the days when moonroof first came out in cars, you know, and so Pat was going along. We were coming back. There was a long stretch from West Palm to Tampa, Highway 60 there, a little place called Yeehaw Junction right after you get off the interstate there. So Pat had mooned us, and so we started, hey, Brian, we got to get back. We got to get back, Pat. You get in the trunk, and then we went through the same routine and backed up to this big truck stop there at Yeehaw Junction, honking the horn, Jack honking the horn. All right, Brian, now. So we popped the trunk, and you know, back in those days, those automatic trunk were a luxury and brand new. So we hit that button, and the trunk come open. Brian, full moon. I mean, he's doing the same thing as Kerry did, and all the truckers. Brian actually jumped out of the trunk, was trying to run to the back door. Of course, the old wrestler thing, you keep pulling off. And of course, his pants falls down around his ankle. So every step he'd make, he'd fall. He'd get back up mooning as he was getting up there. So that's where Brian got that rip.
Well, it was a good one. It worked on Kerry. They, you know, and then Michael and them, they always pulled bad stunts on Buddy. You know, Michael was unique. You know, very few guys were able to work, be a great worker, but also had the mind to, you know, we had Michael up for some of the booking meetings. Sometimes all the birds would come, but Michael was always the one with most of the input and stuff. And so, you know, I'm glad to see Michael the way he got in the right spot up there with Vince, and you know, that was a blessing. It's been a good thing for him.
Yeah, I think the world of Michael. I've been with Michael, you know, up there for, you know, as Jerry has for 20 something years. And Michael's, man, he's one of those guys that when he say we have a problem, Michael solves it right away. Yeah. He just, how about we try this, and he'll outline the 6 months program for you off the top of his head. You know, he's one of those rare, really smart guys to the business. I
always say that's what's happened to the business. You know, I don't keep up with a lot. Matter of fact, Flair's want me to do his deal. He said, you keeping up with the business? I said, no. And he said, catch up, because I want to talk about it. And I said, I can tell you right now. And I, you know, I mean, you can't have two things. One, I went, the Blonde Eric boys were working at a show up here in Sherman. Kevin wanted me to go watch them and see if I had anything I could tell them. And so I went up, and I'll never forget. First of all, when I went in the dressing room, there was more I signed more autographs in the dressing room. I did in the audience. And then I never seen so many belts in my life. Every summit in there had 1 or 2 belts. You know, I mean, from the first match on, everybody had a belt. They were some kind of champion. And, you know, at World Class, we had 2 belts. We had the Brass Knucks Championship and we had the Texas Heavyweight Championship. And then we made the U.S. champion. But other than that, then we came with the tag team and the 6-man tag team. And but my God, everybody there had a belt. And then there was a death match, a Brass Knucks Championship match, you know, a barbed wire match. And I was like, what are you going to follow this with?
Right.
Dave, I also heard a story now. You guys were harder than firecracker there, but something that was really unique at the time was merchandise. When these boys started getting hot, I think it was the Texas Stadium show or one of those big massive shows that you guys had out there. Tell us a little bit about you started the merchandising process for World Class. Is that correct, or you had a big hand in it?
Well, when I got there, Pappy, who was Fritz's daddy, sold the pictures, and he would sell the same black and white pictures every week. He never replenished or anything. So when the boys come along, Fritz called me in one day and he said, got a way you can make some extra money. I said, okay. And he said, I want you to take over the souvenirs. He said, 1, get some good pictures and see what you can do. And so I had the black and white and with the boys, I got color stuff, you know, and we made some good shoots. And back then you didn't share with any of the boys, the souvenir sales. That was just something on the side. And when they came in, they signed off on it every time they signed their check that we had the rights to their picture, their likeness and everything else. And so, my God, I was buying pictures for 22 cents and selling them for $3. I was buying buttons for about 30 cents and we sold those for $2. And then when we finally started coming out with t-shirts and stuff at Texas Stadium, one just off our, you remember your the thing that told you about all the matches that were going to happen. That was really just a 8x11 folded. So it was
an insert type thing. Yeah.
We sold $126,000 worth of them.
Wow.
And then souvenir wise, altogether.
And who was getting the money off of this? Dave? Fritz. Okay.
I used to meet up with him about once every 2 weeks, and I'd take I probably should have had a Brinks truck. I'd head down to him and we would do our little split on all the money stuff.
Wow.
And he got the biggest piece, but that was okay. I was doing real well.
Yeah.
And then what happened was when Lance came in, Lance's pictures were selling. And then when the Birds come in, all of a sudden, even when they turned heel, people were buying the Birds.
Right.
And so at that point, we started selling, you know, a lot of the heels and stuff like that. And we never did start sharing it. Now the Birds kind of got smart to that. And they kind of, after they came out with Bad Street USA, they kind of started doing some of their own stuff. And I would sell them at the tables. And they
was that in Texas where they came out with Bad Street?
Oh yeah, that's a crazy. We did. Michael went on an interview, and he had it all in his mind what he wanted to shoot. They were going to be on this street, and the further down the street you lived, it was a cul-de-sac. The further down the street you lived, the badder it got, and they lived in the last house on the left. And so Michael went on the air, and we had a club over here in North Dallas. He said, we're going to be there Saturday night. If you think you're bad looking and you could live on Bad Street, you be there. We're going to pick out 20 of you to be in the music video. So it was me, Michael, Terry, Buddy was there to judge this thing. Oh my God. I guarantee you, anybody that came in there that didn't know what was going on did not come in. They said, to hell with this. I mean, there was guys showed up with mohawks this tall, squared off, you know, full tattoos, bikers. As a matter of fact, if you look at the video, when they do the deal where they're coming down Bad Street USA, you'll see them standing on the side. And then when Michael and them are coming to fight a territory thing, here's all these guys behind them. It is Bad Street USA.
Wow.
And then Michael's doing the singing in it. So that really got him over there too.
And that's really Bad Street too.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, I love it.
Well, Michael's got that voice, he used to always sound like a radio DJ. He'd be like, yeah, and he could do it perfect. It'd be like anybody would have hired him.
Was Lance, when you guys brought Lance in, was he because you needed 3 Von Erichs, 3 Freebirds? Was that the main reason?
Yeah, Mike wasn't quite ready yet. And we needed somebody right then we could put in the main event role. And it was crazy because I was literally playing golf out at Ditto Golf out there in Arlington. And I keep seeing this guy in his pair of shorts with big thighs, and he just had the look. And I always say he probably thought, I was gay or something, because I kept looking at him all day. And finally we were up in we went into the clubhouse and he was in there. I finally just walked up to him and I said, my name's David Manning. You know who I am? And he said, mm-mm. I said, well, I pretty much run all the wrestling here, and I think you could make some money with us if you're interested. And he was a bodybuilder. And he said, well, yeah, I'd listen to anything. So I told Fritz, I said, I found him. And we brought him in, and the problem is he had never wrestled, and we're going to stick him straight in main events. So we sent him up to Portland to work for Don, and he went up there and got literally about 6-8 weeks worth of stuff. And then we brought him in, and, everybody makes a stink now that we did it because it was a lie. But I mean, do we think Waldo's not?
Right. Whose idea was it? Was it Fritz to look for Lance? Were you looking for Lance Von Erich? Or
It was Fritz and I that came up with it. Kevin was totally against it. And I said, well, if we can find the right guy, it'll fit. And our biggest problem was, Fritz was big on the kayfabe. Well, hell, Lance was from here. Kevin Vaughn was his name. And but he came in and he was over. I mean, his pictures were selling just as much as Kerry's. And I remember he had one with a tiger. He went out somewhere and shot it. And that I couldn't keep that picture. And there was a time when Stallone was going to do, when he was getting ready to make Rocky, I think 4, where the Russian was in the film. Yeah. He wanted to know, he took a look at, Kevin, Kerry, and Lance, but they were all too big. Sly's only about 5'8". He wears the stuff in his shoes, give him a little height. But we knew Sly when he was broke.
So what happened with Lance? What was the final thing, the straw that made you pull the plug on it?
Well, I was gone, so I had left. So I haven't actually talked to Lance. They used me some in his book and questioned me, but I think once Fritz kind of stepped out of the picture, I think him and Kev just, weren't getting along. And I know I like Lance, and I know he was complaining that he was working twice a night. I heard his interview here not too long ago, but I'm gonna tell you what, Kev was doing the same thing. It's like he forgot. He wasn't the only one doing it, because what we were doing, we would have 2 shows going. We started running 2 shows on Saturday nights. So one might be out in Weatherford and the other one over here in Sherman. And so what we would do is we'd put them on early, and then they'd get in the car and haul butt, crisscross going across the state, and then they'd be in the main event. So you had Lance on the card and you had Kevin on each card. So they would just one go on early and then one would come in and go late. And it obviously got old because that's a lot of work and a lot of
work, Dave. But you notice that, and I certainly have, that's a wrestling mentality. A guy that's been in the business or around the business all of his life, you accept that lifestyle. But you bring a guy in from the outside, he has no clue the hours and the effort it takes to become a successful professional wrestler. So you're throwing a guy from the outside into that lifestyle. They just don't get it sometimes. And the guy, even though the guy has talent, it's still up here, that mentality. This is the lifestyle I've chosen to be. Us guys have that option where, I could do something else. So that's just natural, I think, for a guy like that.
Well, and Jerry, the guys back in, I'm gonna say 60s and 70s and early 80s, most places, they weren't doing it for the money.
No, there wasn't any.
That's exactly right. You know, you got paid cash every night. I remember I used to get paid here, Austin, San Antonio, Corpus. You know, they just usually brought it in, you signed over so they didn't have to give you a check and they handed you cash. And that's really what kept you on the road.
Right.
And
you was always in need of that next envelope too.
A lot of people ask me, say, well, how did you get paid as a booker? Did you get a lot of money? I said, no. I said, literally what happened as a booker, I would get paid, whether I was at the show or not, I would get paid preliminary semifinal money. And so it was great when you had a show going every night and 2 on Saturdays. You know, it was a nice payday. And then I got some big bonuses in there. You know, when we did Texas Stadium, I'm in Israel the week before. So I'm doing everything there in the daytime. Well, you know, when it's daytime there, it's nighttime here. So at night there, I was working everything here. I was on the phone. I'd have to go down to the lobby and use the phone and still working everything here for Texas Stadium. So, you know, with Fritz, you couldn't hand stuff off because if it didn't get done, he didn't want to hear somebody else didn't do it.
Yeah.
And so, like I say, I worked a lot of hours. I was on with Fritz. You were on call 24 hours a day. You were a doctor every night.
Right.
What happened at the end, David, when you got out? What was the cause of the fall? And was there anything that could have happened that would have changed things?
Well, you know, a lot of I was going through a divorce, and you know, there was things getting said that, you know, my ex was saying that weren't true, and they were getting a piece of it. She was good friends with, you know, Doris, and Fritz hadn't been through a divorce. He didn't know what it was like. He went through one later and knew what it was like. But between that, and I just thought there were some bad decisions being made. And it's like, people will never know what all I did, you know, and I'm not saying that bragging wise, but it's a lot to run a territory. And when I went to work at Southwest Sports, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people working in the office. One of them sold tickets. You had Gary was the booker, and then you had Blanc, Pletch, and me. And then you had Bill Hines, who did the buildings, made sure the Saturday night ring was set up. I did that for a while. But we went from there till the day we were doing, you know, 100 million a year. We had 12 people when we should have had 30 or 40. You know, you needed someone in every department to really do it right. And so it was just one of those things that, you know, Bumbright came in and bought a big piece of the company. And then Brody came in and was co-booking with me. And then we kind of turned it over to him. I started doing other stuff promoting wise. I was setting up the shows in, and we just kind of got crossways, and I didn't know if it was going to get fixed, and it wasn't fun anymore. And so I got Rick in my ear, we want you over here, you know. Well, the mistake I made, let this be a lesson to anybody out there listening. If you're in high demand, don't quit before you get your deal. Because once I quit, they knew I didn't have a job. So I had turned in my resignation, and then I didn't get near what I thought I was going to get at the other place. And I went over there, and Dusty was the booker, and he had Jim. God, what was Jim's last name?
Bird?
Barnett?
Hurd or Barnett?
No, Jim Barnett was still he was still Atlanta. No, you know, the manager.
Jim Hurd. Oh, Jim
Cornette.
No, Jimmy Dillon.
Yeah, JJ Dillon was the assistant booker.
JJ, yeah.
JJ was the assistant booker. So, you know, I wanted to set in and show what I could do, and I just wasn't getting the chance. I'll never forget. Jim was there. Matter of fact, Jim would be in the office there about 2 days a week. And Jim came in one time. He said, "Hey, how's everything going?" This and that. And I was like, You want to know the truth? I said, I don't know what I'm getting paid for. I said, I can really help here. And he said, are you getting your check every Friday? I said, yeah. He said, shut up and sit at the desk and enjoy it. I said, well, I just feel like I could do more. And so I stayed there, and then I decided I was just going to break away. I had talked to Brody. Brody was literally doing shows for me when he went up to San Juan and got killed. So told me what he's going to do. And I said, I wouldn't do that in another country.
He told you, what did he tell you, if you don't mind telling us?
Brody said they owed him some money. They owed him about $25,000 over time. And so he said, I'm gonna get my money while I'm there. I said, well, good luck, and everybody knew that bunch was tied in with the mob. And I said, just be careful, Frank, you're in another country, and I said, I'm sure Carlos can get anything he wants done. And so he said, no, I'm going to beat the shit out of the first guy they put me in the ring with. And I'm going to beat him up so bad, they'll pay me. Or I'm going to tell them I'm going to do it to all of them. And he did. Actually, the guy that killed him, he beat him to a pulp in the ring. And then
that was the night before, what I remember the story.
The night before, I remember talking to Jeep, and he said that Frank came in, like he always does. He had a beer and he had his bag in one hand. And as he went to set it down, they called him in the shower. And they had the knife underneath the towel. As soon as he walked in, they just stuck him and ripped him. And, then told all the boys, if you come back, you won't leave the island. So literally the guy, he walked from court. And they say Frank laid on the table, for 3-4 hours. They wouldn't even do surgery or anything on him.
Well, they say it took about an hour to get him out of the dressing room too, right?
Yeah, they wanted him dead. And he was a good guy.
Yeah, Frank was a great guy.
He was a great guy. I mean, he was just whatever.
It's Frank.
Frank. And
you knew what you were dealing with Frank at all times.
He told me one night he knew in Japan, he had a big match, and he told me, he said, when he got back, he said, yeah, I got over there and they were bringing in some jujitsu, karate, and they wanted him to hurt Frank. And Frank got wind of it. Somebody spilled the beans. So the night before Frank was supposed to fight this guy, they had a battle royal. And Frank said, so I'm sitting there. I came out, I'm on this side of the mat, and I'd wait, and he came out, was on that side of the mat. So I saw him. So he said, I slowly started walking around. He said, I picked up one of them steel chairs. And he said, when I got to him, I hit him in the back of the head. He said, I don't even know if he's woke up yet. But that was Frank.
Yeah, that was Frank.
So after that, David, was that when you decided you just don't want to any more part of the business? Because you had such this incredible run, one of the hottest territories in the history of the world. And then you just you got out of the business, right?
Yeah, I got out. What I did was, like I say, I went for Crockett, and then I started doing my own promotions. You remember Ray Stern?
Right, yeah.
Ray had some money. He had married into money, right, and had about 3 or 4 Rolls Royces, and always wore that big gold diamond Rolex. Made this one look like a piece of crap. And he always
is that a Ric Flair starter one that you have on your wrist there?
Yeah. He said he did that because he didn't like people thinking he was a truck driver. And so Ray come over and he said, hey, let's do some matches. I'll put some money up. And so we got some offices and stuff. And like I say, we were getting started, and then Brody was going to be our main thing. And we'd offered Brody a piece. And then next thing I know, then Brody's dead. And I did a couple of shows in St. Martinique, and I took some of the guys over there. Me and Chris Adams co-booked it. Chris wanted to work with me on it, and that turned out to be a big mistake for me. We got over there, and Chris was booked in Japan. And on the second or third night, well, I think it was the second night, the guy that ran the show, we knew the gate wasn't right. And I confronted him on it. Steve Casey was there with me. And so we met that next morning, and I just come right out and said, you're lying. And I said, we need to settle up right now with the rest of the money. And he reached in his briefcase and pulled a gun out. And Steve was like, hey, we're out of here. We walked out. He said, Dave, same thing I told Frank, we're in another country here. He said, you'll be floating in the water. So we left. And then a couple of nights later, we went to St. Thomas, did a big show there. And then we had to cross over. So we were going to use the ring in St. Thomas. That was the only wrestling ring down there, other than what Carlos had. And we knew he wasn't going to give us his ring. So we had to send it over on a ferry. And when it got over there, Carlos had got a hold of customs. They wouldn't let it in the country.
Wow.
And so we had to literally build a ring in one day. We took the boxing poles and stuff and built a platform, man. And I felt sorry for the boys. It was like, but that's all we could do. And we built it. And the boys, their goal from first match on was to tear it down. And so by the time we got to the main event, we didn't have ropes. And so Chris, though, the night before, he and I had met up and we were going to settle up then. And he was like, we'll just settle up tomorrow. And the next day I went to his room and Tony, his wife, said, he's gone. I said, what do you mean he's gone? She said he had to go to Japan. So he took the first ferry back to St. Thomas, fly out today. I said, well, you and I supposed to settle up? She said, he took the money. And I was like, oh, shit. So that night, you know how word gets around. Tony must have told somebody because the boys got wind of it. And I'd been paying them a little bit every night. It was a vacation anyway. They were all staying at the nicest resorts. But we did the matches. And I'll never forget, we had a tent set up where the boys were in there and, had two sides to it. So when I went in there, we were using the two young Samoans. As soon as I walked through the door, they snatched me and said, we want our money. And I said, everybody's going to get paid. We want our money now. And I said, as I said, everyone's going to get paid because that night the show was the crap and they knew it. And so I finally said, if you're going to beat the hell out of me, go ahead. It ain't going to get you your money. I said, I've never not paid talent. And Flair was on the card. And Flair stood up and said, give him anything you've got for me. And he said, anybody else, he's good for the money. Kevin was there, Kerry was working. And so they said, you can pay us by day when we get home. But so everybody calmed down then. Well, Chris had probably about 7 of the guys there were his talent. He'd booked them. And so I settled up with all my guys. Some of his I didn't know how to get a hold of. So I don't know if they ever got paid or not, but I paid all the ones that I knew how to get a hold of. Matter of fact, I think that's the card maybe Austin worked on for the first time.
And was that your last bit in wrestling and decided you've had it? And
no, I did a big show in Israel, which is an interesting story because when I went over there, the guy that had done all the shows with the Von Erichs, while I'm there, he sues me. That he had the rights because Lance was working for me. That he had the right to the Von Erich. So he sues me and they froze my passport. I couldn't get out of the country. And so luckily, thank God, you're talking about a blessing. One of the biggest fans there was the former, what would be our district attorney of Tel Aviv. And he's like, I'm telling him the story. And I said, I guess I got to get an attorney. He goes, I'll represent you. I said, how much? He said, I'll do it. And so we went to court. You're talking about scary. We had this judge that had to be 90. And you know how here we have the stenographers, the girl that they don't have that. So he said, I'm going to tell the judge I want it all recorded, which he said meant the judge had to write everything.
Wow.
And so we start out and they're talking Hebrew. So I have no clue what they're saying. And it sounds like they're yelling and screaming and they're going back and forth. And so my lawyer says, see if I got a pencil here. My lawyer's got me in my room and he said, now, when they put you on the stand, I want you to understand something. Your answers are yes, no. You don't provide information. He said, do you understand me? Yes. No. Yes. No. And I said, yeah, I understand. I either say yes or no. He goes, no, you're looking in the wrong place. Yes. No. I said, oh, I get it. So sure enough, I'm on the stand and they're asking me questions, and they asked one question and I was like, and I hear this. I look at the table. No. So this thing goes on for 2 or 3 days, to the point Prince Ali, who is the younger brother of Prince Abdallah, the one that's the king now, that was the older brother. Prince Ali was going to school here and started calling me every Saturday to see how the matches went. So I had an open invite to come to Jordan. So I told my lawyer, I'm just going to get in a boat, go out in the Dead Sea. When I cross over, they'll come get me. He said, no, they might just blow you up. And
they call it Dead Sea for a reason.
Yeah. And so he said, we're going to win this thing. And so the next day we're in court and we're sitting there and they asked me, he got up and he said, and so you took the money from the gates? I said, no, I sold the show. And he immediately asked the judge, he said, can we have a recess for just 5 minutes? I said, yeah. So we went in this other room and he goes, what do you mean you sold the show? I said, I sold the show to Avi, the guy, you know, back when we used to do the big shows. And he said, how did he pay you? I said, well, he would wire the money to Paris and then it would come from a bank there in Paris and he'd wire it to us. And he said, how much? And I said, 160,000. He said, okay. So we go back in the courtroom and I sit down. My lawyer goes up and says, can we approach the bench? And the other lawyer goes up and they're up there talking for a minute, literally like 1 minute. He turns around and says, okay, you can go. They dropped the case. So we got outside. I said, what the hell happened? He goes, it's illegal for an Israeli to send more than $10,000 out of the country. And he said, so I told him I was going to put him on the stand and ask him, how did he come up with 100 grand and where did he wire it to? And he said, they decided to drop the case.
So you go over there to promote a show and you end up in court.
I ended up in court. Not only that, he came to the matches one night and starts throwing his weight around. And Israel's a different, so the people I had hired as security, you know, I said, throw him out, but I didn't mean like physically. They literally picked him up, went to where the gate was, opened it, and threw him in the dirt. So next thing I know, he sued me, you know. But it turned out good. It turned out to be a blessing because Stallone was making Rambo, and he was staying at the Plaza. I was at the hotel right next door. So for that week, he and I became good friends. And he almost used one of the boys for one of the stunts they were doing because that big guy he had that blows up at the end couldn't do it. And but yeah, I became good friends with Sly, so it turned out to be good. Matter of fact, do you remember Jeep Swenson?
Absolutely. Yeah, the biggest arm. I don't know if he was
legitimately the world, 24, right? 26-inch arms, 94-inch chest. Sly's making that movie, and so I went to the set. He invited me to the set. So I go to the set, and I've got my son with me, my ex. We go to the set, and Sly comes out, and we're talking. Jeep's with me. I brought Jeep. Sly I can see him. He keeps looking at Jeep and looking at those arms and looking up. You know how big Jeep was.
Yeah.
And so we're standing there, and finally I looked at Sly, and I said, all right, listen, I don't know what story you're thinking of, but no one is going to believe you can whip his ass.
Amen.
Right. That's right. Jeep had all those wild cats, right? Those exotic cats, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Jeep was, I like Jeep. Jeep was a nice guy.
Where'd you work with him, John? In Europe?
No, I worked with him in Texas.
Okay.
When I don't remember who was trying to run down there. They brought Jeep down there, and I worked with Jeep a few times.
You know what Jeep did before he came to wrestling, right?
No.
Collected for the mob.
Really? He was the nicest guy.
He used to tell me, he said he wouldn't collect from anyone that didn't have the money, but if he knew they had the money, he would go into their office, take the phones and take them off the hook. He had another guy with him. They would take all the phones off where no one could call out. He always carried a pair of wire cutters, and he said he would grab the guy by the hand, put it down, put the wire cutters on and say, okay, I'm going to count to 5. He said, I never had to cut one finger off. I said, would you have? He goes, hell yeah.
He was doing an interview one time at Sportatorium, and he had some type of, I think it was a panther, it was a black exotic cat, and the cat got a little scared and Jeep grabbed his collar while he was doing the promo because he had a live crowd there. That cat bit through his hand and Jeep didn't sell it. He's sitting there with this cat and this thing that bit through his hand, and Jeep finishes his promo and then grabs the cat by the collar, pulls his hand out and drags it to the back and comes out. He had a hole through his hand. I mean, he was a tough guy. Plus,
you remember I had the tiger. I took it to the sportatorium one week. Kevin wanted to take pictures. I had the Bengal tiger. And I take him in there. And so while I'm not looking, Kev, we had ordered Church's chicken. He took chicken and stuck it on him and Carrie grabbed me like we were tussling around, and Kevin sticks it to me. And so when I went in there, the tiger, all of a sudden he's getting real feisty with me. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? You know, and it's, and then I realized there's a piece of chicken on me.
I was about to go to Japan for like 2 months, and they brought Jeep in. It was Crockett. Crockett was trying to run Texas. He brought Jeep in. And so he sit down, he goes, John, he goes, Jeep, John's one of our main heels. He's gonna work with you today. He goes, I want you to, work with him, put him over. I said, well, what do you need? Now, I'm doing the job. I'm going to Japan. And he goes, look, I want to make you look strong. I said, okay, what do you need? He goes, about a minute and a half. I said, and Jeep, to his credit, ixnayed it. He said, no, I can't do that to him.
I had Jeep against Lance in Israel. I had Abdullah against Brody. Double main event. So we get to the matches. We're going to do a DQ in the Brody match, and we're going to have Lance beat Jeep. So Brody and all the baby faces are in this room, and I got the heels over here. So I go over and I'm laying out the finish to Abby, and then I laid out the finish to Jeep. Jeep goes, I don't like that. I'm not going to get pinned. I said, Jeep, there's no TV here. I said, who's going to know? I just don't like it. I don't think this and that. So I'm like, shit. So I go back to the other side, and I'm talking to Len, and Brody can tell something's wrong. He goes, what's wrong? I said, Jeep don't want to do the job. Frank jumps up. He's got the boots. He put the other boot on, goes stomping out the door. I'm right behind him. Goes right in the other dressing room, screw kayfabe. Goes in there and looks at Jeep, and he said, all right, listen up. You're going to wrestle Lance tonight. You're going to put those big fat shoulders on the mat for 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, we're reversing the matches. It's me and you and Abdullah and Lance. And I guarantee you I'll put your shoulders on the mat. He said, whatever y'all need.
That's great. That's great. Brody had roughed him up a couple of times, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the first big matches they had, Brody didn't give him hardly anything.
Yeah, Kevin got mad one night. I forget what it was about, but he was upset with Frank, and I was like, Kev, it's not a smart idea, because I've always told people, if you were going to try to whip Kevin Von Erich, you would have to kill him.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Because he's another one. I watched him pull his tooth one night, wanted me to pull it. I wouldn't do it. With a pair of pliers in the dressing room, he pulled his tooth. Michael Hayes was sitting there. And I was like, Kevin, no, let me. And luckily I talked him down, but I don't even know what would have happened there.
Before we go, I got to ask you this, because I'm a big fan, and I mean this in a very complimentary way, of hustlers. You at Pull, I understand you have 17 300 bowling games. And also you were legendary gambler back in the day, back in Texas. So you got to tell me something about this.
Well, I've had 17, actually 18 300s. I've had 2 800s. This is an 800 ring right here. ABC. If you shoot 3 games in a row that add up to over 800, they send you a ring. So it's not easy to do. I threw 34 strikes out of 30 shots. Didn't shoot 300, matter of fact, in that. But I used to bowl a lot. I used to bowl. I never went pro, but I bowled with some of the pros and doubles and stuff like that. And then I had a friend that was a bookie, and he started giving me information on football. Got to be careful here, but you know what? I'll just say I'm one of those that I honestly think they have a book or two. They planned it out from day one to the Super Bowl. And so I used to make a lot of money, and Flair always tells the story. Flair and I are getting on a plane one time, and I was sending a guy to a guy to Vegas one time, and his girlfriend came to pick up the money. I was supposed to meet him, and she showed up, and she was like, I guess I'm supposed to pick up some money. And so literally I gave her $20,000, and I said, tell him that I'll call him as soon as I get the info on who to bet. She said, okay. We never saw her again.
Really? She stole the money. She stole $20,000.
She had broke up with him.
Talk about getting hustled.
So Rick that's one of Rick's favorite stories, because he was with me. It was me and him traveling.
So how big were you gambling back in the day? Because there's always, as you get older and, the stories become more legendary. How big were you gambling back in the day?
Well, luckily, the bookie I was using was a wrestling fan. And so I was like every other Joe. I was losing almost every week. Not a lot, because I didn't bet a lot. But then one day he calls me in and he goes, look, you need to be on my side. He said, you think Vegas turns all them lights on losing? And he said, I watch for where the public's betting, people like you, and I bet the other side. And so I literally started backing a guy in to book football, and we would look and see who everybody was betting, and we would bet the other side. And, it started paying off. And so I won a lot of money. Now, Fritz was dead set against it. Fritz got word of it, and it almost got me fired. But, and it's funny, when I started giving out the information, it's like then all of a sudden I wasn't winning as much. I don't know if I shouldn't be smartening too many people up or what, but we would go to Vegas. I'll never forget the first time we went to Vegas. It was the convention for all the bookers and the owners, and so Fritz took me out there, and I lost my money in about an hour. And remember Mike LaBelle?
Right, yeah.
LaBelle bet big, and he had told Bronco, he said, I've got a system this time. I'm only going to lose this much, and then the next day I'll do it again. The next day, he said the same thing about Mike LaBelle. He said, we all went up to change, and Mike stayed downstairs. And he said, a little bit later, I come back and he's sitting in a chair. And I said, he said, did you lose your system didn't work? You already lost a day's money. He said, I lost all the money. So, but it's kind of like I had the bug then, but I was playing blackjack and stuff. And so Fritz was giving me a lecture all the way back then. But the funniest thing that happened at that deal, I'm sitting at a table with Dusty, Terry Funk. I think Kerry was there, and me. And so Kerry's sitting there like this, and the dealer's dealing to all of us. And he's like, man, I've never seen so many big guys and whatever. He said, what kind of convention's going on? Got to be careful how I say this now. They use the F word, but he said, it's a gay convention. And Dusty says that. And so Jim Barnett's coming out. He goes, matter of fact, he said, there's our president right there. He said, hey, Jim, fellas. So the guy was like, but it was, I look back, hey, I love the business. I wish, matter of fact, I got some guys right now who just approached me. What would it take to do it again? And could I be hired? And I said, truthfully, it'd take about, someone show me they got half a billion dollars in the bank. And we're going to shoot video probably for 1 year without booking one big event. If we do book events, we're going to let them in free, so we got a full crowd. And I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I have an idea of how I could do it different than what everybody's doing right now. And they loved it. So they said, we're going to call you back. So we'll see.
That's good. Did you, when you got out, you just kind of got out? I've always been kind of curious about that. Jerry and I both kind of stayed in. Did you miss it?
Oh, hell yeah. And I missed all the benefits. You guys know, there for a while here, I never paid for a dinner or anything. But missed it, missed the boys. But, when I went to, I told people, Flair had me come over when the first time they had WrestleMania here, and I went over and I met the guy that used to write for all my children, was the guy writing their stories. And, but I was watching the boys and I said, I was speaking at something, I forget what it was for. And, oh, I do too. It was the Hall of Fame, not Vince's, the other one. And I was talking and I said, I look, it's a business now. The pranks, they may be there, but we don't hear them. Back in the day, if someone died or someone got hurt, I mean, it was a family. And, everybody shed the tears. I don't know I just don't see it anymore like that. It was like robots, finding out what they're going to do. And
yeah, and I think one thing that's changed, David, is the phones, because now, we didn't have that. And
thank God.
No kidding. All we had was each other.
Yeah.
And we didn't have an internet. We didn't have DVDs. We didn't have video games. We didn't have, that we could carry with us. And now these guys are building their brand on their social media, and some of them become very valuable. I'm not saying it's good. I prefer the old style, but I think that's one of the reasons that there's so much.
I think that's one of the reasons. And I watch, you can't help but see it on social media. Some of the bumps the guys take today is just,
oh my goodness,
it's ignorant.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time to one of them's paralyzed or one of them's dead. You don't fall off a 20-foot scaffold and land on the floor or land on a table and hope it breaks right. Right. I told the Von Erich boys, that's one thing I told them. I said, don't let anybody ever talk you into a finish you're not comfortable with as far as your body. And if you're in the ring with a guy that can't take care of your body, get the match over with and get the hell out of there. And so with me, when I left wrestling, I've been blessed. I got involved in network marketing, believe it or not, because I could speak, and Ken Mantell got me in. I was doing nutritional products and started speaking on stage and got real popular and was making money. And then I got in the travel business. I own one of the biggest travel companies in the world now, Extreme Travel, spelt with an X, STREAM, X, and like a running stream. And we have about 3,000 travel agents under our umbrella. I sold my network off here about 3 years ago, and I just been blessed. I've had, I was talking to Kevin, and money's not, I've been blessed with money after the business, and I just don't know if I could put up with it anymore. It's not the same.
Right.
So,
yeah,
but I enjoy stuff like this. It's always, it's funny. Every time we do one, I'll remember another story.
Oh, that's great.
One of the best times Jerry and I have every week. We started this during COVID because we were so bored, and we literally wanted to do something to make people smile. It sounds altruistic and BS, but it wasn't. That's why we did it. And we started talking to our buddies on Zoom and taping it. And that's what we do now. That's one of the most fun things we do every week, is getting on this and talking to people, legends like you, and hearing about stuff that is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Because so many people don't realize there were so many different hot territories, and every one of them had a story, and a great story, and sometimes multiple great stories. To me, it's just our history is one of the most incredible histories of any type of entertainment in the world.
Well, I told Flair he want me to come on his new one, and I said, I sent him over. I sent Conrad a deal, and I said, you know what we should talk about? Who in our time, who was the top 20 shooters, who was the top 20 workers, who was the top 20 showmen? People will love it. Because especially the shooter part, they don't realize who was a shooter and who wasn't. There were some real tough asses in our business.
Real tough asses.
Well, David, thank you. I can't thank you enough. I've been looking forward to this for some time. I grew up in Texas and grew up idolizing Fritz. One of my youngest memories was telling my grandfather in Sweetwater, Texas, watching Fritz Von Erich on Saturday night, one day I'm going to be like that. And, so it's so cool that Texas always has a special home for me, and especially the guys like you that were in the heyday of Texas heyday. So do you got anything that you want to push, or social media, or anything that you want to promote?
People can reach me. My Facebook's David E. Manning. A lot of the boys have reached out, over the years, and I stay in contact with some of the older guys. I'm going to try to go to the Red Bastien thing. But it's crazy, now that Brooks is gone. The last time I was there, I may call Brian Adias. Brian and I, but we've always been good friends because he was like one of the family with the Von Erichs, and Brian Gower, his real name. but he was up with me when we shot that thing for The Rock up there, Tales of the Territory. It's
Yeah.
funny, you know, I had kind of died down. I would still run into people. My wife now, she was not a wrestling fan. And I go to a Maverick game and we're sitting there and having I got my daughter and her husband with me. And so I said, I ordered us 4 beers. The guy goes away and he comes back. My wife's in there and he says, I said, how much? And he goes, I don't even want to charge the great David Manning. I look at my wife and I said, did you hear that? He said, don't forget, I'm not a fan. So, but you know, I miss those, but it's crazy. You guys have been interviewed and most of it turns into nothing. When the Dark Side of the Ring came, they stayed at my house for almost 10 hours filming. And then all of a sudden they wanted me for another episode and then another episode. And I've now been on almost more than anybody. I just did the one about Terry Gordy. You know, and I did they did one on Chris Adams. I've done it. I'll be in 2 now on season 4. I was in 3 in season 1. And that has revived. It's crazy how many people watch that.
Right.
All of a sudden now it's like I've been revived. And I've probably done this is probably my 20th podcast in the last 6 months. So
wow.
Dave, you know what it's like, David, is when Vince created the WWE Network, and he had start putting all his old stuff out there. I was working, in a good spot for Vince at the time. I said, okay, listen, don't show anything about Roddy Piper or Bobby Heenan because they're going to realize that I'm a pale comparison to either one of them. When they look at the old territories, they realize what wonderful, great, colorful characters there are that you can't replace. And you can, whatever you want in the history, you will never be able to place these guys. That's why I think the nostalgia for our business is so strong.
Yep.
Dave, are you involved in any way that this movie coming out on the Von Erichs?
Kevin and I talked about it. They did call Kevin. They didn't use either one of us for advice, so I don't know what in the hell they're going to say. Because if they're not using me or Kevin,
right,
we're the only 2 left that know the real story. And but someone asked me the other day, who's playing you? I said, I have no clue, but I don't know how they're going to tell the story without me. Because it was me that Joe Higuchi called about David's death.
Right.
I did all the interviews when we found Carrie. I did all the interviews whenever we found Mike. And, sadly, I've been a pallbearer 3 times and I've been at 4 funerals.
Yeah.
And then, like I say, I was Fritz's right-hand guy for about 12 straight years. So gonna be hard to tell the story, but I saw somebody in the ring that kind of looked like he had a mustache and stuff. So I guess so, but I'm anxious to see where they got their info.
That damn James Beard, that's where the mustache came from.
That's right.
Well, Dave, John and I talked about having you on, and neither one of us have really met you. I find it hard to believe that I've never run across you because we go way back in years. John's still a kid compared to us and everything. But it's a pleasure talking to you. I've been looking forward to this because we have so many mutual friends out there that are gone out, like Gary Hart, Skandor Akbar, and Bruiser, and all those guys there. But what a pleasure it was to talk to you today. And man, maybe down the line we could do a part 2 of this thing. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.